Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. We have a big episode today. For those interested in the thumbnail story about the threat to the system, this is the third development, the final development, which we'll cover in the second half of the video. If you'd like to skip to that, you can do this with the skip feature below. Otherwise, let's move into the first story. The global semiconductor industry is bracing for a major shakeup as China's aggressive expansion into older semiconductor technologies drives prices to unprecedented lows. This looming China shock, as some analysts are calling it, threatens established market leaders and could reshape the competitive landscape for years to come. A key example is silicon carbide (SiC) wafers used in high voltage power semiconductors for electric vehicles, aerospace, and data centers. Just 2 years ago, a mainstream 6-inch SiC wafer from US-based Wolfspeed cost $1,500. But Chinese suppliers like Guangzhou Summit Crystal Semiconductor and Tanky Blue now offer them for as low as $500 to $800. This drastic price drop is fueled by China's state-backed subsidies and a robust domestic supply chain. China's success in SiC is due to heavy government investment, totaling approximately 688 billion yuan, almost $100 billion, since 2014. Unlike cutting-edge semiconductor production, which faces US export controls, China has been able to rapidly advance in mature chip technologies and compound semiconductors. The impact on industry leaders has been significant. The just mentioned Wolfspeed's stock has plummeted more than 96% from its 2021 peak, primarily due to being undercut by these new heavily subsidized Chinese competitors, and its CEO has left last year amid financial struggles. Other major SiC wafer manufacturers, such as Japan's ROHM, have reported consecutive losses since mid-2024. China is also expanding in so-called mature semiconductor nodes, 28 nanometer and older chips used in smartphones, home appliances, and cars. According to IDC, China's mature chip production will make up 28% of the global supply market by 2025. An industry association, SEMI, says this could reach 39% by 2027. Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp, SMIC, which is based in China, exemplifies China's growth in this space. SMIC's revenue surpassed $8 billion in 2024, more than double since 2018. Now the world's third largest contract chip maker, it continues aggressive expansion with annual capital expenditures exceeding $7 billion. While China's push has yet to achieve full self-sufficiency, it is already reshaping global markets. The industry must now adapt to an era of ultra-low prices and government-backed expansion that threatens traditional business models. Now, while we're on the space, this brings us to the next development. Nvidia remains unfazed by the emergence of DeepSeek R1, cutting-edge AI model from China, despite ongoing export restrictions impacting its business in the region. During its latest earnings call, that was this week, Nvidia CEO Huang noted that reasoning models like DeepSeek R1 can require up to 100 times more compute power, which could ultimately benefit Nvidia's hardware demand rather than threaten its market position. While China was once a major revenue driver for Nvidia, the company acknowledged that its sales in the region remain at about half their pre-export control levels. Huang confirmed that the percentage of total revenue coming from China has remained consistent across recent quarters. Nevertheless, there may still be indirect revenue streams linked to China, as suggested by a recent case in Singapore. Authorities in Singapore have charged 3 men this week with fraud in connection to the unauthorized movement of Nvidia chips, allegedly destined for DeepSeek. Investigations revealed that Chinese national Li Ming had falsely claimed the chips were intended for a different company. The case underscores the challenge that US export restrictions pose, as entities seek alternative routes to access high-performance AI chips. Now, despite these regulatory hurdles, DeepSeek continues to make waves in the AI space. The startup, which disrupted the industry in January with an AI model rivaling OpenAI's recently reopened access to the application programming interface API after a 3-week suspension due to capacity shortages. The move comes as Chinese tech giants Alibaba and ByteDance accelerate their own AI initiatives, signaling growing competition within China's AI sector. Alibaba has pledged a staggering $53 billion investment over the next 3 years to strengthen its AI and cloud computing infrastructure, while ByteDance is testing a self-developed deep reasoning model. DeepSeek has also taken an unusual step by open sourcing key elements of its technology, including its deep GEMM library used in training its models. This decision could intensify the ongoing AI race between the US and China, with both sides pushing to develop more advanced and accessible AI tools. For now, Nvidia remains a key player in the AI hardware market, and while DeepSeek's rise is notable, its growing compute demands may ultimately reinforce Nvidia's relevance rather than diminish it. Next up, we have the main story for today, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, it's always a huge help if you can hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is also tremendous help. Thank you so much. Brad Setster, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former senior US government official, recently published an excellent piece titled, "Xi is Making the World Pay for China's Mistakes." Setster makes some points about US domestic politics, which I'm unqualified to comment on, but what is important for us to note in this piece are his observations about China's industrial policy and its effect on the global system, which I think are very thought-provoking. I initially wanted to summarize the salient points within the piece, but the article is so good that instead I'd like to end today's video by quoting several extended extracts from the piece directly, which we will do now. President Trump's readiness to use coercive tariffs presents a profound threat to the post-war economic and political order. But he is not the only danger the world economy faces, and may not even be the biggest. That may be President Xi Jinping of China, whose more strategic and calibrated industrial and economic policies are fundamentally distorting and harming global trade. Trade usually refers to the combination of imports and exports, but Mr. Xi has upended that idea, radically changing China's trade interaction with the rest of the world, at least when it comes to manufactured goods. Over the past 6 years, China's imports of such goods increased by an average of only 15 billion a year, essentially no change at all when inflation is taken into account. Its manufactured exports, on the other hand, have grown more than 10 times as fast, by over 150 billion US a year. When it comes to manufactured goods, trade with China is virtually a one-way street. China now dominates global manufacturing, and its trade surplus dwarfs the biggest run by Germany and Japan during their eras of post-war export supremacy. Countries around the world get cheap Chinese products, but they can't sell nearly as many of their own to China. Their export sectors are hurting, see Germany, and not hiring. Why is Mr. Xi doing this? To make up for the Chinese government's mismanagement of its domestic economy. The roots of the problem go back to the global financial crisis of 2008. The crisis caused Chinese exports to fall. The government could have offset this by strengthening the ability of Chinese consumers to buy the country's products through policies that support household incomes and by reducing the hefty taxes on low-wage workers and domestic consumption that finance China's state. This would have helped China transition to a more sustainable economic model that is balanced among industry, trade, investment, and consumer spending. Chinese leaders opted instead to funnel the country's huge household savings into an immense investment boom. New bridges, roads, and above all, apartments were built, and all of that construction and related economic activity allowed China to rely a bit less on exports for growth. But this created a real estate bubble, and when Mr. Xi responded by cracking down on the housing sector in 2020, he triggered a deep property slump that has persisted. Mr. Xi's response to the COVID pandemic also played a role. To cushion the pandemic's economic shock, advanced economies around the world opened up their government checkbooks to support consumer spending. The one major economy that didn't take significant steps to stimulate its economy and support households was the country where the virus first took hold, China. He is ideologically opposed to cutting government checks or anything else that smacks of welfarism, believing that consumer stimulus, unlike investment, generates no lasting value. So while consumers in the United States and elsewhere began spending again, including on Chinese imports, China was able to recover on the back of other countries' stimulus checks while throwing everything into building out its manufacturing sector to replace the growth that property wasn't providing. In other words, Mr. Xi is making China's trade partners and competitors pay for the government's misplaced bet on real estate and its longer-term failure to strengthen the spending of Chinese households. China does import commodities and natural resources, such as oil and iron ore, as well as advanced semiconductors that it hasn't figured out how to engineer. But China's dominance in manufacturing and exports cannot be overstated. Take automobiles, the anchor of so many industrialized countries' manufacturing sectors for the past century. Around 20 years ago, China was a non-factor in automaking. By 2018, it had the capacity to produce 40 million gasoline-powered cars per year, far more than the 25 million its economy needed. Since then, it has added, thanks in part to substantial government subsidies for the industry, the capacity to make 20 million electric vehicles annually, a number that may soon rise to 30 million. Annual global automotive demand is 90 million cars. China has the capacity to produce around two-thirds of that. This pattern is replicated in sector after sector. China routinely produces more than half of the global supply of steel, more than half of the world's aluminium, and more than half of the world's ships. In clean technology sectors such as solar cells and batteries, China can produce many multiples of current global demand, and there are fears that it could replicate these successes in memory and automotive chips. What's more, China has partly made up for the fall in domestic steel demand caused by the housing implosion by subsidizing the building and equipping of new factories that use domestic steel in churning out more manufactured exports for overseas markets. All told, Chinese export volume is growing 3 times as fast as global trade. This means China's success is directly coming at the expense of manufacturers in other countries, which increasingly cannot compete and face pressure to abandon sectors that China targets. With China's real estate market still in the doldrums, the pattern shows no sign of changing. This points to a world economy in which China has no need for the industrial inputs of other countries, while leaving those countries dependent on Chinese-made goods and vulnerable to Beijing's political and economic pressure. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. I'd very much like to hear your thoughts on Setzter's piece and his observations therein. Thank you everybody for watching today's episode of China Update. I hope you have a good and restful Saturday, a restful weekend, and I will see you back for a new week of updates on Monday.